But let's bring in our guest. We're talking about the economies and whether or not that was his strength or not. Professor of Political Economy and the convener of the Big Tent, Professor Pat Utomi. Prof, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Well, it's a pleasure to be able to join you.
Prof, I know that you have strings of memories of Muhammadu Buhari from the days he took over government through a military coup. I think you were in that government. And then to the days of the military and to the days of him as a civilian president. So I would always like to have your overview of the person of Muhammadu Buhari.
Well, I think a very good way to engage this subject is to bear in mind a motto of mine, which is that yesterday is of value for orientation, but what matters more is tomorrow. So that in whatever we say, we're looking at orienting for tomorrow more than getting caught in emotions of yesterday, because they don't do as much for the possibilities as a good focus on tomorrow. Yes, I have had a long history with General Muhammadu Buhari. Yes, I was in the government that was overthrown on the 31st of December of 1983. Yes, I lived through the Buhari military years and the challenge of economic strategies for Nigeria during that period. If you recall, Nigeria was already in economic crisis, talking with the IMF and all of that, at the time that the Shagari administration was reconstituted, and new strategies were being developed for engaging and going forward when the coup d'etat took place. The government of President Buhari began to deal with some tough stance relative to the IMF and what alternatives were before them. Amongst those that were implemented was a counter-trade policy. Counter-trade, Brazil was very prominent in that arrangement, where Nigeria sold oil in exchange for commodities which were running dry in Nigerian stores. A company called the National Supply Company was set up to import basic commodities into Nigeria. They were called Esenco, essential commodities. And there were long queues for basics like milk and sugar and the like. These obviously dealt with severe problems that we had in foreign banks confirming lines to Nigerian banks, so importation was significantly challenged. Oil revenues had dropped, and all of that. These were amongst the reasons that a palace coup forced General Buhari out, so that structural reform policies could be engaged in to get the economy to play globally. There are many ironies involved in all of this, because the man who would become president of Brazil, Enrique Fernando Cardoso, who also held some of the kinds of dirigist policies that drove the Buhari approach, would completely commit, if you will, intellectual suicide in reversing the thrust of Brazil's policy to revive Brazil's economy. So it's a very mixed review when you go back to those days. Of course, he returned at a time when some of us felt that the most significant problem Nigeria had was corruption. If we could take his discipline. And by the way, one of the reasons that I came to an accommodation with the person of General Buhari, came up from far away Indonesia. I was doing research in the late 1990s in Indonesia, Malaysia, during the Asian financial crisis, spending some time at Bank Negara, Malaysia, the central bank, and then going on to Jakarta in Indonesia. I became quite friendly with a former Indonesian oil minister who was oil minister at the time that General Buhari, as Lieutenant Colonel, was Nigeria's oil minister. And Professor Mohammed Sadli, who was my host in Jakarta, talked quite a bit about this stern, austere, young colonel from Nigeria who was oil minister when he was oil minister. And some of those conversations led to a rethink of Buhari in my own consciousness, because I thought what Nigeria needed was a very disciplined mind, a very austere person who, you know, would go against this culture of, you know, bloated government and all of that. And that rethinking then coincided at a point in time with Chief Olufalaye, who led the Progressives. I had been drawn by Chief Anthony Anauru to come into the Progressives movement, and then Chief Anauru passed away, and we had Chief Olufalaye take over, and Chief Falaye's mantra was, you know, General Buhari likes to chase thieves, and he has a lot of following in the north. If we could only get him and work with him while he's chasing thieves, Pat, you can fix the country. And we used to laugh about that mantra. And it unfortunately turned out that there wasn't a good strategy for chasing thieves when he returned as head of state. And we had a very, very poor 8 years on his watch.
Okay. Well, Prof, you talk about the time under his watch, and again, there is what people close to him feel. We've had a lot of them speak very fondly about him, his person, his discipline, and there's what majority of Nigerians feel, which is what you've talked about, the economy, and even under his administration, you didn't shy away from those issues around legitimacy, the handling of the economy, corruption, and all of that. But on a personal note, do you recall your very first meeting with him? Do you recall your last meeting with him? What were your impressions? And what do you think changed along the line?
No, as a person, he was a terrific human being. I met many, many times with him. By the way, striking irony here, I was with him alone in his home in Kaduna one evening, and we were just talking, you know, Nigeria, how can it be fixed, and all of that. And his phone rings, he picks up the phone, he talks for a minute, and then comes back to me and says, President Yaradua has died. So I was with him when he heard of the death of Yaradua. And by irony, I was with P2B day before yesterday when we heard of his own death. So history has its way of going around and coming. But General Buhari, like I say, I met back in the face-to-face Progressives movement. We had lots of meetings in the home of late Chief Braithwaite, Dr. Braithwaite, Tunji Braithwaite. But most people don't realize this, but he was a very humorous person. You know, we cracked jokes without stop. And I don't know if this is fair to bring this. He told, one of his stories he told was of a man who became Chief Justice of Nigeria. Maybe it won't be fair to name him. They all joined the army at the same time. And they all were sent out to England. And part of the training was that they would be left somewhere and you're supposed to make your way back to the camp, you know, walk, do whatever, you know. He said, this fellow just took a taxi and returned to base. So the next day, the British authorities just quietly packed his things and sent him back to Nigeria. And then the Sadowna had to find him something else and sent him to law school. He eventually became Chief Justice of Nigeria. But anyway, General Buhari was full of jokes, and we enjoyed those jokes. He was also a very, very simple man. General Buhari, would look at a big problem and just give a one-line response to it all, and everybody would laugh. Look, I ran against General Buhari in 2007. We participated in the presidential debates together at the ECOWAS Center, and it was a collaborative, very peculiar. The BBC correspondent, a lady, came to me after and said, "What's this thing you guys just did? Is that supposed to be a debate?" Because General Buhari would be asked a question, and he was known to just go off on where he wanted to go, no matter what the question you asked him was. And then I would nicely say, okay, I think what General Buhari meant to say was that with agriculture, we would do X, Y, Z. And so I was debating both sides.
You were a spokesperson during the debate as well.
Yeah. After those elections, and the opposition got together, it was usually Atiku Abubakar to my right, Buhari to my left, and I spoke for the presidential candidates. And so we really did build up camaraderie, and we did get along very well. I like to say, and I repeated it in my Tuesday tonic that has gone out for today, the blog that I run every Tuesday, the Tuesday tonic. I said, look, everybody who seeks a place in public life must ask themselves, what one or two things do I want to be remembered for? And they must stubbornly pursue the optimal accomplishment of that one thing or those two things whenever they get the opportunity. But history provides you very little windows. You don't do that, you fall into a great trap of having been a great guy who turned out to be a poor leader. Again, I think one nice way to close it is, you see these things on the internet. There's a church somewhere in Texas that says, in this church, we train you to live your life so that we don't have to tell lies at your funeral. Because many times people are constrained to say nice things at a funeral. So, but that church says they train you to live such that they don't have to tell a lie at your funeral when they're giving their great sermon about you. But the person who captures it, I think, best in my thinking was Stephen R. Covey in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That asks you to just imagine, talking about beginning with the end in mind. Imagine that you've gone to a funeral, and imagine what you would like everybody filing past this person who has passed away to be thinking. Not what they're saying, what to be thinking as they walk past the body. And as you get to the casket, imagine that you are the one inside, and ask yourself, what would you like people who are filing past your casket to be thinking about you on that day? Because everybody will have that day. And then with that end in mind, live your life so that that is the result of that day. Unfortunately, a nice guy that General Buhari really was, and I can attest to this from dozens of meetings with him, personal meetings, and all of that. It was clear. I mean, my falling out with him when he became president happened within weeks. Long before he even had a cabinet or anything, within weeks, he made a couple of statements outside Nigeria about the state of the economy, and I said, my God, this guy will ruin this economy. And I called the incumbent today, went across, I live close to him in Lagos, and said, this man will kill this country. Let's talk to him now. But that one was more politician than I am. So he said, let's look, let's cool down, let's watch it. And I began to withdraw. And that was it. That was it for me. And the history is there to tell the rest of the story.
Well, profound thoughts there, Prof, when you think think about the wisdom that you've put out about what we should be doing, to prepare for life after this time, and also, hilarious times that you've recalled as you went down memory lane. But beyond all of that, perhaps this is the time that we should also begin to reflect on the lessons from late former President Muhammadu Buhari's leadership, his politics, even as a diplomat, because we can't stop thinking about how he was determined, to achieve that feat yet again, become president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. But then some have described his time as a missed opportunity. So when you reflect on his life as a leader, as a politician, as a diplomat, what lessons can we learn, from his handling of Nigeria as a country?
Well, one is that inclusion is very, very important. Any leader who does not think inclusion will be challenged. We talk about policies and all of that. To deliver on policy is really about changing behavior. I mean, what is involved in building a road between Kaduna and Abuja? It's not about putting asphalt on some surface. It's about getting people who come from Kaduna to Abuja to change how they get to Abuja, the behavior. If you put asphalt on the bush track between Abuja and Kaduna, and the people decide that something black is against their tradition or whatever, and then continue to run inside the bush to get to Abuja, you have not achieved that change of behavior of how to get from Kaduna to Abuja, even though there's an asphalted road. So it means that first and foremost, you need to get the people to accept that you have their interests at heart, and that this asphalt that you're putting will facilitate how they get from Kaduna to Abuja. That's what policy implementation is about. And sometimes I hear people talk a lot of nonsense about, good policies badly implemented. It shows the person doesn't understand the meaning of implementation. Implementation anticipates what will not make the thing, policy anticipates what will not make the thing translate into the value that was projected for. And so it takes into account all of those things. So you can't say there was a good policy and bad implementation. That is absolute, oxymoron. And many times, very sadly, what tends to happen is that we put out these things that are designed to show, look, we know what we want to do. Which is why James Robinson, one of the winners of the Nobel Prize in Economics, said in October last year, the day they were announced as winners, that, what it is to develop a country is not rocket science anymore. Most people know it. But some countries, and he cited Nigeria as a clear example of a country that knows what to do to develop, but somehow does not do what it needs to do. And in the excuses that have been given for many things that General Buhari's government failed to do, I feel a sense of, look, what are these people talking about? Because what was to be done was known. What were the impediments to getting it down was known. But somehow, people played ostrich. So when you are inclusive and you bring in all the constituent elements and this new direction you want to travel in, it's much easier to get that change of behavior to facilitate the goal. But when people feel that there's a legitimacy crisis with any regime at all, then the cooperation for effectiveness in implementation does not quite happen, and the goal does not get achieved. And this is why the first lesson in leadership is how to include. And President Yar'Adua was a classic, great example of this kind of leader. And Nigeria lost so much that President Yar'Adua passed without living out his term. I can tell you, I sat for hours with him to talk about some things, and even I was stunned at the extent he was willing to move to have inclusion in order to get things done.
All right, Prof, what you just said just gives a reflection of Section 14 of the Constitution that talks about a sense of belonging. But we'll come back to you and talk about the issues around the economy as far as the management of it was concerned with Muhammadu Buhari. But we'll need to just show our viewers yet again the presidential aircraft taxiing at that airport, getting ready to take off from the airport in London, bound coming to Nigeria, specifically going to Katsina, and then from there it will head straight to, they will take the body and head straight to Daura for the funeral rites, according to Islamic tradition. And that is expected to take place sometime around 2 p.m. today, Nigerian time. Channels Television is right on ground to make sure that you don't miss any part of this last moment of former President Muhammadu Buhari. So that's the aircraft, the presidential aircraft taxiing at that airport, leaving London for Nigeria.
And just to say, about 6-hour flight. So we expect that, give or take, 1 p.m. plus. The flight should land. The body will be received by President Bola Tinubu himself, and there'll be a very short military procession, and the body will eventually be taken to be buried according to Islamic rites. As we said, it's going to be a simple one, but as much as possible, also have all of the trappings of a state funeral, because that is what this is. It is a state funeral. So we expect that that flight would land around that time, and would, of course, be live to receive the flight for you, just so you can see and not miss any moment.
Apparently, you won't miss any moment. So you can see just last moment before Kayode was talking, you can see cameras capturing the aircrafts or the airborne coming to Nigeria. Prof, let's come back to you. Let's talk about your assessment, if you will, of his management of the economy. Some have said that was perhaps one of his greatest weaknesses. By the nuances of the current administration, they looked at it, said there was so many wage bill, and so they expunged a lot of subsidies. The abuse of the Ways and Means that got us almost 23 trillion, and then when you add interest, it's neighboring around 30 trillion. What do you think was actually the missing link? Is it is perhaps not understanding of the economy or his team as at that time?
Well, in my view, there were obviously a number of things. First and foremost, as many people have said, he wasn't a hands-on kind of a manager. And then he had a disposition, which was if he trusted you, if he liked you, you could never do wrong. If he did not like you or did not trust you, you could never do right. That was his disposition as a person. And so when he appointed people, they all ran off in different directions, and so there was no cohesion in policy. Now, one of the sad things about his watch was that we did not have an effective grip on fiscal policy, on the fiscal side. The monetary side then thought it was their responsibility to run the economy, which was a terrible mistake. I mean, the people in central bank were friends of mine, and I told them that back then. And they said, oh, look, Prof, you see, there's no monetary side. If we don't do anything, what will we do? But then they then took on what they did not know how to do. And when they went, in my view, for political reasons, into multiple exchange rates, that was the kill. I called them, I begged them, and I said, don't, please don't. Because how did we get to overcoming the institutional crisis with foreign exchange management in Nigeria? Recall that back in the 80s, Nigeria had a block currency. And so, basically what it was central bank allocated foreign currency. But when oil prices began to bring in plenty of dollars, it seemed okay. People were importing anything, sand, whatever. And then by 1982, For like 2 weeks, we didn't sell 1 barrel of oil. The crisis came home to roost. Foreign banks began to refuse lines of credit to their Nigerian banks. We couldn't import things. We had become import dependent in many ways as a country. And so the exchange rate went totally out of whack. The purchasing power parity line veered so much from the nominal exchange rate that if you put it on a graph, anybody who understands will burst into laughter. I remember being at the INSEAD in 1993, I think it was 93, and a certain really world-renowned professor of exchange rate management, Ingo Walter from the Stern School, was making a presentation, and he had exchange rate alignment for regions of the world. Showed Latin America was totally crazy. Latin America was then running in crisis. That was when you could go into a store in Brazil, and while you were still shopping, the price would change 3 times. You know, it showed Southeast Asia, and you could see why they did well. The closeness of their purchasing power parity line to their exchange rate, the nominal exchange rate. And in fact, many of them played to keep their nominal exchange rate such that, you know, exports could go on. And they were implementing an export-led industrialization strategy. In Africa, it was very mixed, very problematic, but Nigeria could not even be contained on the graph. It was so wild. You know, what we were doing was subsidizing the terrible consumption of a certain elite and killing agriculture and others with those kinds of exchange rate policy. It took so much work going from a 2-tier exchange rate, iterations that eventually led to the emergence of a foreign exchange market. And we know how much that did to stabilize things in the economy. To wake up with that lesson and begin to create multiple exchange rates frightened me. And I told my friends who were involved, don't do this. Oh, they said fiscal side is not doing anything, so the monetary side, they have to do their best to keep, you know, Anyway, it came home to roost. Those who had connections and had power got money, dollars at one rate, and simply just round-tripped the thing, and people were getting rich doing nothing. The incentive system, economics is about incentives. Incentive system was demolished in the economy. Production suffered because you were punishing those who tried to produce, and those who played the game with exchange rates got away with murder and took money out of the country. This is what the policies did on his watch that took things south, very far south. Okay. Before you knew it, we had returned to the poverty capital of we had become the poverty capital of the world. But you know, I was not as frightened. I was pained, but I'm not as frightened by that because of my experience watching India. You know, I keep letting those who run Nigeria know that if they look at what happened in India, they can learn very important lessons. 1991, I went into Delhi. India had only 3 weeks money in their foreign reserves, or 3 weeks trading money. India was technically bankrupt. And what were the things that created those conditions? Rajiv Gandhi obviously was one of the first Indian leaders to recognize that their strategy was not running right. But to make a shift, the necessary shift, would be to repudiate his mother and his grandfather, the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty. And so Rajiv was cherry-picking on what to do, you know, and then he died in that assassination. And the Congress Indira party had to put up some, if you will, placeholder for Indira Gandhi to be ready. And they picked Rao. Narasimha Rao was an old man, as they used to say, who had nothing to lose. But his choice of Manmohan Singh as finance minister and the efforts they began to make at reforms began a process which by 1994 was seeing inflows of significant capital, significantly from the Indian diaspora into India. That began a turnaround. Anyway, sorry, I can get on these things.
Yeah, Prof, we know, and your thoughts are always welcome because it's for the good of the nation. Today we are honoring the life and the time of the man Muhammadu Buhari, and so it's important also for you to make some of these remarks so that current and future leadership can learn the lessons from the places where there were missteps, apparently, that landed us where we are. But Prof, thank you so much. It's always a great time, always a pleasure to speak to you whenever you come to share your in-depth insights into the state of nation and the economy. Professor Pat Utomi is a professor of political economy and the convener of the Big Tent. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure.
And we will take a quick break. It's a continuous coverage of the last moments of the former President Muhammadu Buhari, whose body is now airborne, heading down to Nigeria and Katsina State, where he will be laid to rest sometime later today. So we are just looking at his time and his life across board with several guests and some of the highlights of his time as a leader of our country. We'll be right back.